Hello, students. In this narrated PowerPoint, we are going to look at Chapter 5, which deals with managing and mentoring middle schoolers successfully. Most middle school students are beyond the need for the self-contained classroom and the relationships it provides, but they really are not ready to be completely on their own in a large school. The middle school specifically attempts to help students move from one type of relationship that they experience in elementary to the other, which they'll experience in high school, while simultaneously providing its own special brand of teacher-student affiliation along the way. Managing and mentoring middle school students depends on teachers who understand and respond positively to the unique characteristics of young adolescents. And those are going to be elements that we're going to discuss today. Educators who accurately and empathetically understand the characteristics and needs of young adolescents relate better and connect to them more positively. This positive connection then leads to improved behavior management. Middle school educators must have a thorough and compassionate caring for the students in their schools in order to develop effective behavior management systems. And to do so, they need to adequately respond to their unique physical development, their mental development and hypercriticality, their emerging sexuality, their social interaction, their emotional development, their self-esteem issues, their moral development, spiritual development, and their unique cultural aspects that they bring to the classroom. Let's unpack each of these just a bit because they are extremely important. In terms of physical development, we know that your tweens and early teens are at a really self-conscious and awkward stage of development. And this can contribute to classroom discipline problems, and teachers need to bear in mind the great changes that young adolescents are going through. In terms of mental development and the notion of hypercriticality, research reports that sometime during the ages of 10 to 15, many students begin to acquire new mental abilities. Among the attributes acquired by many middle school students is the ability to think more abstractly, hypothetically, and critically. And so they have these new intellectual skills, but they're not just confined to the way that they treat academics. They stem out into peer relationships and even in the way that they view themselves. They become critical of peers, they become critical of their parents, they become critical of themselves. And it takes a while for the lens through which they view things to become widened and to have that peripheral vision instead of just honing so sharply in on others and their negative attributes or reflecting back on their own negative attributes. And so you have to learn to coach students out of that. They also get to this point where they realize, hey, my mom and dad aren't perfect, my teacher's not perfect, president's not perfect. And this can lead them to be somewhat negative. They might claim class is boring, everything is stupid, but it's because of that sudden shift from a more utopian view of life to now I can think critically and abstractly, but I'm not exactly sure how to balance it yet. It's a sudden change that they have to navigate through. Of course, you have emerging sexuality. They're going through puberty, and as a result, they can be highly distractible and uninterested in the curriculum the teacher has to teach and interested in other things. And we need to be sensitive to that, but we also have to encourage our students to be respectful of one another and respectful of each other's sexuality. That is something that is not taught well at all in the public schools. And even in the parochial school system, sometimes it's not touched on enough that our bodies are vessels of the Holy Spirit. And you can still teach that without getting into, religious teaching in the public school systems about just respecting every facet of our human being. Social interaction. Many young adolescents are by nature caught up into the web of social needs, and it seems very difficult to remove them from that. They care much more about what other people think of them and how well they belong than they care about anything else. They're looking for recognition and for approval, and it's going to be all the more difficult for you in the era of social media and where students have instant access to social media via their phones. So you're going to have to do the best you can to promote healthy social interactions, but to encourage students to not let their identity be caught up into what is going on socially and how they're viewed by others. The research does show that many young adolescents are willing to sacrifice academic progress for social success. And so, providing students opportunities to socialize within the realm of academics, to have and engage in academic discourse without getting too derailed and off topic, those are going to be good opportunities for them to continue to dialogue and discourse, but within an academic context. So, it'll be important for you to try to provide those opportunities. Emotional development. Emotionally, young adolescents are in a transition as well. And here's the issue. Their emotions are changing and they're not really sure how to fully articulate them clearly. And they can go from being totally fine to being entirely despondent or an emotional wreck with, the drop of a pin. So you have to teach them to learn how to deal with their emotions in a patient and calm way, and to know that it's okay to feel strongly and not to voice it or react in such a way. So just teaching them how to cope with these drastically changing feelings, but to know that they still have control and choices regardless of their feelings is very important. With respect to moral development, we've talked about this in previous chapters, particularly chapter 1, where students are in this inferiority and identity phase, and they need to develop an understanding and appreciation for group norms, for laws, for rules, that they are important not just because of the consequences that they impose, but for keeping order, fairness, justice. Now, one thing that young adolescents really understand is the idea of fairness, probably because they're a little self-centered, but at any rate, you want to scaffold and you want to complement that strength of theirs to help them understand why we have rules and why we have social norms and why we must care about keeping things smooth and peaceful within the community at large. Many young adolescents are developmentally immature when it comes to moral thinking. Um, and some of this probably has to do with a lack of emphasis on spiritual development in middle schools and in public schools, period. There's this great relationship. We know that it's a symbiotic relationship between the moral life and the spiritual life. And if we're not encouraging students to invest in their spiritual life, how can we still expect them to progress healthily and successfully morally? Just some food for thought. With respect to cultural differences, we are much more multicultural than we have been in the past. And one way that we need to reach out and make sure that we're making our curricula and our different activities more accessible to everybody is to teach with a culturally responsive curricula. And I don't want to get into that too much now because we're going to spend a whole week on that in a little bit, but you can consult pages 232 to 235 for a little bit more information about that. The middle school teacher must bear all of these things in mind, and having all of that in mind and looking and viewing their students through a lens that takes into account these various unique and transitional aspects that their middle schoolers are bringing to the table will help them to create classroom policies, classroom activities, behavior management plans that are going to better respond to the needs of their middle school students, but also help to scaffold them to a place where they're more independent and mature and able to then be successful in a high school setting. Indicates that the mutual support that teachers on teams, and we've talked a lot about team teaching and co-teaching thus far, that mutual support that teachers on teams can offer each other is a crucial factor in mitigating the unusual stress of teaching at the middle school level. And not only are you going to have teams in place because so much of the curricula is interdisciplinary in nature and you have teachers who specialize in their content area. So when you're creating and implementing these interdisciplinary units, multiple teachers are going to be crossing paths or be in the classroom at one time. So it makes sense that all teachers would be on board with the same discipline policies. And here's what's interesting. Peer support via the team, that interdisciplinary team, it decreases feelings of isolation and stress that a teacher may experience. And it increases the levels of professionalism of the team members. So it enhances collegiality and that sense of community among the faculty, which is fantastic. So one of the first ways teachers on teams can use their combined power is in the area of managing student behavior more consistently and effectively than by acting alone. So this is a win-win. It's a win-win for the teacher, and it also gives consistency and transparency to the student body. They don't have to think about, okay, what are the rules when I go to Miss Smith's class versus the rules when I go to Mr. Aborn's class? No, there is one set of rules collectively, and they're transparent and they're consistent. So the students are more likely to acclimate more easily to them because of that. Together, the team needs to come to a consensus on the most important student behaviors. So if you look on page 244, there's a list of some of what the whole team might come to a consensus about. For instance, students must come to class prepared and on time. Gum, candy, and food can be consumed only during snack time, for instance. So in order to come up with a healthy and productive team discipline plan, they first have to come to a consensus on the most important student behaviors. Next, the team needs to agree to consequences regarding misbehavior. And then they need to develop ways to encourage correct behavior. I want you to particularly highlight on page 225 a list of key features of good team discipline plans. These are essential to any effective plan. And some of the key characteristics: one, they are as positive as possible. Two, they spell out all specific behaviors so they're thorough. So there's 6 different elements. Make sure that you highlight those, blow them up so that you have them handy, and make sure that your discipline plans when you enter the classroom mirror those effective elements. Chapter 5 also highlights key elements of establishing productive procedures for activities that occur every day. What types of activities am I talking about? Like the use of lockers, bathroom times, rules when students test. And what you really have to come up with as a team is a list of consistent procedures to promote transparency and better behavior. Because the more explicit you are and the more you spell out the details of the procedure, the more there's no questions that can be raised either from faculty or students when a misbehavior occurs. Finally, teams should craft policies for parent conferences to ensure that they are productive and pleasant for all involved. So check out page 250, which highlights some elements to include for positive and successful parent-teacher conferences. The teacher-student relationship in the middle school is often associated with the term advisor or advocate or mentor. So you as the middle school teacher become an advisor, an advocate, or a mentor to a host of different students. Middle school students are encouraged to leave the sheltered atmosphere of an exclusive relationship with one adult behind, what they had in the elementary school. But they're simultaneously guarded from the impersonal anonymity that might characterize a large high school. Every student in the middle school will have a teacher who considers him or herself to be the school expert on that particular child, his or her mentor or advisor. In this way, the middle school continues to supply a smooth transition from the elementary to the high school. Now, an advisor-advisee relationship does not simply mean checking in on a teacher's assigned students regularly. Now, don't get me wrong, that's definitely part of it, but if that is all that it is, then the advisor-advisee relationship fails to have the overall objectives that such programs shoot for, which is to really help students form a sense of community within the school while also moving outside of themselves to serve the community. So basically, in a nutshell, you as a teacher will be assigned a host of advisees, and you will want to develop advisory programs for your advisees. And these can occur within the school day if time is provided, or they can occur after school. Now, the goals of an advisory program are to foster an atmosphere characterized by concern, openness, and understanding, to provide an environment and activities that allow students to feel accepted and valued by teachers and peers, to promote the development of group and school spirit, and also to allow students the opportunity to build self-esteem and social skills. If you turn to pages 281 through 284, you'll see a host of different ideas for advisory programs. And these are ones that could occur during the day. They could occur once a week. They could occur after school, maybe once a month. There's a lot of flexibility. I mean, they could be as simple as indoor and outdoor games. So I did mention that you want these particularly to serve the community, but if there's something that's held during the day, they might just be something that's exclusive to building community within the school. They don't have to be something that serves the wider area, but that is one benefit of an advisory program. So you could have indoor and outdoor games with your advisory group. Um, you could have intramural sports, a story time, career exploration. Some things you could do that might be more occasional and less regular would be to do like a community help project. What is a service project we could do to continue to work together and to build some school community while serving the wider community? Maybe that's visiting a nursing home or doing some type of service project for an organization in need. Um, it could also include field trips to different places and holiday celebrations. So, those are just some examples of successful advisory projects that can occur between you, the advisor, and your advisees to help build a sense of community within the school, help these students to establish healthy self esteem, great interpersonal and social interactive skills, and to help them get to a place where they have a stronger self concept and are better prepared to walk into the halls of their eventual high school.